Welcome back, everyone, for segment 2 of Vestiges of Christianity, Theological Contentions with Deacon Thomas Moreland. We just finished our discussion about the election results. Of course, we could have probably kept going on that topic. But right now, we are going to shift gears here and start talking about another controversy. And that is the law in Louisiana about not requiring priests to be mandatory reporters for child abuse. And this goes back to the seal of the Sacrament of Confession. We're going to talk about that seal. We're going to kind of debate a little bit about it because there's some theological challenges to it that I admit, as a bishop, exist. Stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss part 2. Once again, thank you. This is Bishop Bryan Ouellette for segment 2 of Vestiges of Christianity today on November 9th, 2016. I am here with Deacon Thomas Moreland, and we are now going to be talking about the seal of confession that is contained within the Sacrament of Reconciliation, perhaps the most unpopular sacrament of all of the sacraments of the Catholic Church. Of course, unfortunately, though, it is one of the most beautiful and the one that is the leastly appreciated. And part of that is that people don't think that they have any reason to confess their sins to a priest. They just go directly to God with it. So why bother with the grace of reconciliation? Well, there's a whole theological framework for why that is an important thing for us to do as Christians, particularly as Catholics. But let's start off with this law. So, Thomas, you brought it to my attention back last week, and I had not even really been following it too closely, although I did know that there was some contention going on regarding it, because I know that there's a big movement out there of people who want priests to be mandatory reporters for child abuse. So why don't you start off by telling the audience what is going on out there in Louisiana and what this controversy is all about?
Right. Essentially what happened was in Baton Rouge, a girl reported to her priest during confession that a long-term parishioner was or did sexually abuse her when she was 14, and she reported to the priest did nothing to stop or report the alleged abuse. In 2008, she decided to, or 2009, she decided to sue the parishioner, who is now deceased, the priest in the diocese, that over the mandatory reporting law, saying that he didn't do his due diligence by reporting, as the law said. And it went all the way to the Louisiana Supreme Court. Supreme Court sided surprisingly with the Catholic Church, saying that, the seal of confession, you can't force a priest to break that. So social media for a little while there exploded on the Catholic Church, and because they don't understand the seal of confession, they don't understand the sacrament there, and that a priest is under the pains of excommunication if he reports anything that he hears in a confession. So that was the big firestorm that happened.
Yeah, and that one of the things that you were showing me were actually people within the independent sacramental movement even criticizing it. And you would think that the ISM would at least have some basic understanding of the sacraments. I mean, certainly they've worked hard to gain apostolic succession, and they are representing the Catholic Church, even though they may not be affiliated with the Vatican or under the canons of Rome. Same thing with us. I mean, we're not under the canons of Rome, but as holders of apostolic succession, we by default represent and the Catholic Church. And people listen to what we say. And so when we speak negatively about something, it is a reflection upon the Church. So, I'm surprised that there's this much confusion, because the seal of confession is actually a fairly straightforward thing, with the exception of one issue that we will talk about here in a moment. But I'd like to first start off by just talking about the Code of Canon Law in respect to the sacrament of the seal of confession. Now, keep in mind that independent Catholic churches are not bound by the canons of the Catholic Church, nor are the Orthodox churches, but there is a similar understanding amongst them, where this canon would be maintained regardless of the person's political affiliation to the Roman Catholic Church under its authority. So the canon in question is Canon 983, and that states that the sacramental seal is inviolable. Accordingly, it is absolutely wrong for a confessor in any way to betray the penitent for any reason whatsoever, whether by word or in any other fashion. Okay, so basically what this is saying is a priest under no circumstances can reveal what he has heard in the sacrament, during the sacrament of confession or reconciliation. He does not have the authority to reveal the contents of that confession, regardless of what it contains, which would also, of course, include child sexual abuse, where the mandatory reporting laws would normally come into effect. Because, I mean, we are, if you're a teacher or if you're a therapist, if a child comes to you and says, I'm being sexually abused, you are legally obligated in those professions to report the abuse to the authorities so that the child's interests can be protected. But the Sacrament of Reconciliation cannot be violated, even for that reason. And so if a child comes in and reports that, we'll get to this in a moment. Let's make it a little bit more simple right now. If a sex offender were to come into the confessional and say, Father, forgive me, for I have sinned. I have been molesting this child for the last 6 months. The priest would not be able to reveal that confession, because it falls under the seal that cannot be violated under any circumstances. Okay? Now, here's where it gets complicated, because when you read in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, there is a slightly different feel to it, which actually goes back to the earlier writings on what developed the seal of confession. We're going to talk in detail about this tonight, or today, I should say. And that is Catechism 1467, that says, given the delicacy and greatness of this ministry and the respect due to persons, the Church declares that every priest who hears confessions is bound under very severe penalties to keep absolute secrecy regarding the sins that his penitents have confessed to him. He can make no use of knowledge that confession gives him about penitents' lives. This secret, which admits of no exceptions, is called the sacramental seal, because what the penitent has made known to the priest remains sealed by the sacrament. And of course, anybody who overhears the confession is bound to that seal as well. It's not just the priest. If you're an interpreter and you go into the seal of confession to hear the confession of somebody who speaks a language other than you, and the interpreter obviously hears that confession, that interpreter is also bound to the seal of confession. If you're in some Orthodox churches, confession's not held within a private area. It's actually sometimes done right in the sanctuary, and people know when there's a confession taking place to kind of stay away from that section. But if you were to overhear someone talking by accident, you would be bound to that sacramental seal the same way that the priest is. So that's a given. Now let's look at Canon 21 from the Fourth Council of the Lateran, which was binding on the whole church. And this states, "Let the priest absolutely beware that he does not by word or sign or by any manner whatever in any way betray the sinner. But if he should happen to need wiser counsel, let him cautiously seek the same without mention of person. For whoever shall dare to reveal a sin, disclosed to him in the tribunal of penance, we decree that he shall be not only disposed from the priestly office, but he shall also be sent into the confinement of a monastery to do perpetual penance." So it's very severe. The penalty that a priest will suffer for violating the sacramental seal of the Sacrament of Reconciliation is very severe. It actually now results in excommunication, it's overall it's a horrible thing that would happen if a priest were to violate. So nobody does, it's only recently been challenged by this new progressive government mentality to even question that a priest would have to violate his own religion in order to follow the law. So fortunately, the Supreme Court understood this, and they passed the law accordingly that releases priests from the legal mandate to reveal as a mandatory reporter. But the reason I bring up Canon 21 of the Fourth Council of Lateran, and also what the Catechism of the Catholic Church states, is that unlike what we see, which is a little bit more vague in canon law, what we've noticed in the Catechism and in the Fourth Council is that the wording specifically states that the sacrament of confession has to be present for the seal to be in effect, and B, that it has to pertain to the sins confessed. So the gray area, and this is where Deacon Thomas and I decided that maybe we should do a show on this to better explain. The gray area is in what happened with this child. Because even though it's not entirely clear as to the nature of the confession, nor should it be, if there was a confession that needs to remain under the seal, we're not entirely sure she just didn't go into the priest and said that she needed to talk about something that was going on and revealed it. So the question here is, when does the seal of confession become active? It's not, at least if you look at what the church has taught about it, it's not by virtue of walking into the confessional. It's only when the sacrament of reconciliation is present. So if you go in and expect if you go into a confessional but don't confess any sins and reveal confidential information, the priest is not necessarily bound by the seal of confession because no confession took place. But it's a gray area Because I have heard bishops and priests talk about how it doesn't matter, it needs to remain confidential regardless. But that's not the wording that's contained here within the Catechism or even the original wording from the Fourth Council of Lateran. So it's very, very important, I think, for us to really reflect upon this a minute and see, well, when, would the priest have been even in violation if there wasn't sins confessed? Now, if the little girl goes in and says, Father, forgive me for I have sinned, I've been abused by this parishioner, but I actually enjoy it, and I feel guilty for enjoying it, then the seal is absolutely in effect, because she's confessing a sin in relation to something that's also a crime. But if she goes into the confessional and says, Father, I need to speak to you, this parishioner is abusing me, and no confession took place, and no absolution took place, then the sacrament of confession never took place. And that becomes a very difficult gray area. So how do we handle that? And Deacon Thomas asked me, what I would do, and I explained to him what I would do, and I'll explain to you what I would do if I was faced with this situation. Hopefully, I'm never faced with this because this would be a horrible situation to have to be faced with. But I am prepared for it if it were to ever happen. And so if a child were to come to me, not under the seal, not seeking confession, but needing someone to talk to in confidence, and using the seal of confession for this, which is a bit actually inappropriate to use the seal of confession for a purpose other than confessing sins. But that's another issue altogether that we can talk about later if you want. Then I would do everything within my power to convince her that she needs to come forward, and that I would stand with her when she reveals, what's been going on, so that she can get help, that this can cease and desist. If it was the abuser coming and confessing the sin of abusing a child, then I would do the same thing. I would actually withhold absolution from them until they confessed, because the penance that I would require as his confessor, which gives me the sacramental authority to withhold his sin, I would say, I cannot release you of this sin until you have already committed the penance of stepping forward and facing the penalties for your crime. So it would sort of be a non-issue unless the penitent would actually walk out and say, well, I would refuse to do that, and just is willing to live forever in mortal sin. Then it would be a problem, because then I couldn't talk about it. But that's not to say that as a priest under the canons that we've just talked about, that I wouldn't be allowed to go to the police and say, this child, assuming the person who commits the crime, mentions who it is, I could go to the police and say, this child is in danger, and hope that the police, knowing that I'm a priest and limited to what I can reveal, would be able to take appropriate action and then investigate and look into the situation. That actually does happen, and that is an acceptable way around this issue. But to make them mandatory reporters is a horrible thing, because it violates the integrity of the religion and the sacrament itself. So, Thomas, what are your thoughts on this? And I'm sure you have a lot of questions that you think the audience might have. And now's a good time also to call in if you want at 802-321-0073. That's 802-321-0073. I know we don't get a whole lot of live listeners. Most of you prefer on demand. But if you do have a question or a comment and would like to contribute to this discussion, now's a good time to call in. And you can even refer back to the second one if you listen to our segment on the election results. We can take your questions and comments about either issue. But Thomas, until we receive a call, what are your thoughts about this? And do you have any questions of your own?
I just think that, unfortunately, people don't tend to understand the sacrament of confession. And it's unfortunately one of the as you said earlier, one of the lesser thought about sacraments, even though it is probably one of the most important. I mean, what other one is going to forgive you of your sins, and what other one is going to give you the grace of God? Only I'll give you the grace of God, but which one is going to forgive you of your sins? There's only one. But in regards to what we were talking about, simply the way I think of it is, and simply break it down. If there's no sin confessed, then there is no confession. The priest in this situation, he probably could have done something in the sense of what like you said, he could have went to the police with a vague statement, or he could have just reported it anonymously with a vague statement, obviously not reporting the girl's name or anything that would have broke the seal. It disheartens me, as you said earlier in the show, and when reading comments and stuff like that, people within the ISM would break the seal of confession, the seal of confession that many saints have died to protect, to report this to the police, and it is a very painful thing for the priest to bear. Keep in mind the sins that they hear, and some that they can't, even though they may want to, report on. It's a very painful thing for them to bear their entire lives, that they hear these things, that they possibly do something to prevent it, but the seal of confession is not even so much between the priest and the confessor, or the person confessing, is between them and God. And it's not the priest's job to, get in between them and God. There is some gray areas that we talked about, and I think if we could elaborate more on how, and to me, it's a bad misconception that I hear a lot from Protestants and secular people, that, you can just go to confession and you can, state your sins and you're freely forgiven, and you can go back out and recommit your sins. Well, it doesn't exactly work like that. Like you say, you don't have to, a priest or bishop doesn't have to, relieve them of that sin until it's corrected. And if you could elaborate some more on that, that would possibly get people to confess their sins or confess their crimes regardless of what it is.
Yeah, that's a good point. It comes down to, let's talk about what reconciliation does. You're talking about the restoration of the state that a Christian receives at baptism. So baptism washes away all sins, venial and mortal, and including, in fact, it's the only sacrament that washes away original sin. Nothing can wash away original sin except the sacrament of baptism. But if you live long enough after your baptism, you're undoubtedly going to fall into sin again. Because even though you're not bound to the penalty of original sin as a baptized Christian, you are still bound to the consequence. So you still have to contend with your sinful nature. Baptism doesn't change your sinful nature. It merely gives you the grace to deal with it. What the Sacrament of Reconciliation does is, when you do commit those sins after baptism, it restores you to the state of perfection that you received at baptism by washing away all venial and mortal sins. And the Sacrament of Reconciliation is the only thing that can remove mortal sins after baptism. So, no matter what sins you commit before baptism, baptism wipes them out. But anything you commit after baptism, the sacrament of reconciliation is required for mortal sins. So for mortal sins, those have to be grave matters. We're not talking about lying or cheating on your high school exam or something like that. We're talking about murder. We're talking about adultery. We're talking about serious offenses against the moral integrity of the Christian that commits the sin. And so the sacrament of reconciliation gives us complete restoration. That restoration is achieved, once again, the same way it was achieved in baptism. And that is the idea that they are blotted out. God wipes them out as if they never were. So even though you committed them within the historical context of your life, they have been spiritually removed as if they never happened. But in order to be able to enjoy that benefit, you must not only confess the sin, you must not only receive absolution, you must also be penitent. You must be resolved never to commit it again. So it's not good enough to say, okay, let's go back to the child being molested. If you are the molester, it's not good enough to go into the sacrament of reconciliation and say, I'm molesting this child, I'm sorry, please forgive me, receive absolution, but fully know that you're going to go back and do it again. If you do that, then the absolution does not take place, because it's not just the authority of the church through the priest that gives or grants reconciliation. It's your participation in the resolve to never commit that sin again. Doesn't mean you won't do it, but all you need to be required of is the resolve to not do it, to truly believe and truly be consistent within your heart that you are going to not do this again, even if you do eventually fall into error. But to go into the confessional with the idea that, well, I'll confess it and then I can go and do it again, then I'll just go back and confess it. Sacrament of reconciliation does not work that way. So the part about blotting out the sin is important and part of the seal. Because part of the reason why the priest is bound to strict confidentiality is not just to protect the integrity of the Christian and give them a safe place to reveal their innermost sins, which is important for confession to work. Because, if you know that the priest is going to talk about you, why would you ever feel comfortable enough telling the worst things that you've done to him? But it's also about moving on. Those sins, once they have been absolved, are gone. So now you can go on with your life. And we don't think about them anymore because they've been spiritually wiped out. And the historical context doesn't matter. Remember, Jesus tells us in the Gospels, the sins you have forgiven will be forgiven, the sins you retain will be retained. So the church has the authority to not only forgive sins, but to retain them until proper penance has been demonstrated. And of course, it's Christ that ultimately forgives the sin. It's not the priest. But the priest has the authority by proxy to make that assessment, because the resurrected Christ is not operating on the human level anymore. That's why the representatives of the church are priests, men who are flawed and make mistakes and commit sins themselves. So do you think that answers the question, Thomas, or do you think I need to go into more detail about that?
No, I think that's adequately what I was asking.
Yeah. I want to say it goes back to our understanding of original sin which is very flawed, particularly in the independent sacramental movement. And part of the reason why the independent sacramental movement is not respected by the larger canonical churches is because some of them have fallen so far from the Christian tradition that they don't even represent Catholicism anymore in any way. They call themselves Catholic. They're very quick to tell you how they have apostolic succession, but they don't have any fundamental understanding of the teachings of the church. And in favor of that, they've created this new matrix that is now called progressive Christianity, which is a horrible disaster of a theological corruption. And they have changed the sacramental theology. So, hey, guess what? We don't have to follow the sacramental theology of marriage anymore. Now we can marry gay people. We don't have to follow the sacramental theology of confession anymore. We can report. When somebody comes to us with a child abuse, we can go and tell people that. They have in their effort to create a religion of me. It's all about who I am, not about what the church teaches, not about yielding to the authority of the church. Because remember, these people have authority problems. I have met very few people in the independent sacramental movement who are not there because they have problems with authority. They don't want to surrender to the larger church. They don't want to yield and show humility towards the system that they have acquired for themselves. And, people can say, well, you're an independent sacramental bishop, so what's your excuse? Well, I can explain that. Number one, my church and my episcopacy has never once violated the sacramental theology of the church. It has maintained the integrity of that tradition. Because the sacramental theology of the church is unchanging. And if it were to be modified in any way, assuming it could be, it would require an ecumenical council to do it. It could not be done by one bishop who just decides, hey, I'm a liberal progressive, I'm going to start marrying gay people. It's not about being against gay people. I have nothing against gay people. Nobody in the Holy Nicolean Catholic Church is against gay people. I can assure you of that. In fact, we service them. In fact, one of the things we do that the Roman Catholic Church would be scandalized by is that we minister to them. We allow them to receive our Eucharist. And they might say, oh, they're in mortal sin. How can you do that, Bishop? Because the sacramental theology of the church is not being violated by that. In fact, the theology of the church teaches quite the opposite. Because who did Jesus hang out with? Did Jesus hang out with the best of us, or did he hang out with prostitutes and tax collectors who were the worst sinners in the world? And I don't even think homosexuality is so much a moral sin as it is a fundamental product of original sin. Because I think most of the genuine homosexuals that exist in the world who are trying to be genuine people are not choosing this lifestyle. They are naturally inclined, and I liken it to myself. I mean, I'm a hopeless heterosexual. There's no chance that I could ever find another man attractive in any sexual context. Impossible. It would be impossible for me. So I would imagine that genuine homosexuals would have that same feeling towards women, that they could not find them sexually attractive. So to force them to find them sexually attractive when they don't is also a big sin. So we should never force to change them. But the fact that their condition exists is because this world, this universe, this creation has been made imperfect by what the church has taught to be original sin. So our job is not to condemn them. Our job is to minister to them. And I use that as an example because a lot of people are upset with me for this position. But if I were a Roman Catholic bishop, I would not be able to minister to them in a way that I would need to. without becoming without violating canon law. So it's important that the Nicolaitan tradition exists independently of canon law because it is restrictive. Another way that we see it as restrictive in this ministry is our ability to conduct exorcism ministry, which is the primary outreach of the Holy Nicolaitan Catholic Church. We make it available to everyone. I don't care if you're a Christian or a non-Christian. I don't care if you're a Catholic or not. Whereas if you're not a Catholic, the Roman Catholic Church is not even going to take your claim of needing spiritual help seriously. They will never even investigate an exorcism or a need for an exorcism or an alleged possession if you're not a Roman Catholic. In some cases, even if you are Roman Catholic, they don't even investigate it. Some of them don't even believe in it. And so I didn't become an independent sacramental bishop because I wanted to stand against the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. I became one because I felt that this ministry needed to work with the people who are falling through the cracks, the people who the canonical churches have forgotten. And so that's why I'm a part of this movement. But unfortunately, that is not the main motivation. Most people have gotten into it for selfish reasons because they have extreme biases and extreme paradigms that they are not able to live outside of. And now we're seeing it in the corruption of the sacraments. So it's not just marriage that's been abused by the independent sacramental movement. It's the Sacrament of Reconciliation that we're seeing in this right now. So it's a pretty sad state of affairs. And all we can do, I think, Deacon, is continue to teach the correct apostolic theology. And to protect the tradition that we've been sworn to protect as ministers of His grace. Do you have anything to contribute to that?
I would just to the audience, if you're a member of any of the ISM out there, question things, question your minister, question your priest. Go just randomly before you confess. Go, what's your opinion on mandatory reporting? Now, if he says he's for it, I'd run fast and far away because he doesn't hold the sacrament of confession in the manner that the church truly teaches. I'd question him on all the sacraments. You have to be a valid apostolic church. You have to have valid apostolic theology. There's no way to get around that. I mean, it's impossible. Once you violate that, you're no longer an apostolic church. If your church does follow that, outstanding. If you want a church that does follow it, but is still open to a large amount of different ideas, the Holy Nicolaitan Catholic Church might be the one for you. Check out our website. I'm not trying to shamelessly promote us, but check out our website. There's more information on there than you'll probably find on any independent sacramental movement website. We have many links to different things. Everything that we teach is there. Nothing's hidden. But if you want valid apostolic theology and teaching, and if your church isn't doing it, we do. So just to put that out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to talk about it because we're part of the Nicolaitan Church for a reason. I didn't choose this ministry. This ministry chose me. I was perfectly content being a Roman Catholic priest. I never wanted to be a bishop, for one thing, and I certainly never wanted to leave the larger Roman Catholic system. I didn't really want that. I just felt that the abuses that were taking place were more than I could handle, and that my ministry was being called by, God was calling me to a ministry that needed to step outside of that framework, but still remain truly Catholic. We are genuinely Catholic, and not everybody in the sacramental movement who claims to be Catholic is. And I don't want to criticize the independent sacramental movement too much, because, like I said, we are ultimately a part of it. But there are a lot of abuses that exist within it. It is not regulated by any governing body. Everyone is self-governing. That's the nature of being autocephalous, and that has its disadvantages. So, we have to, be very cautious with choosing and selecting in the sacramental movement who you want to work with. And so you come to a Nicolaitan Catholic Church, you're going to be dealing with ministers that take the sacraments perhaps more seriously than you'll even find within a lot of canonical systems, because that is our highest authority. That is our highest vocation. And the seal of confession is to be respected to the utmost degree. But keep in mind, that does not mean we have a right to violate it as even lay people. Okay? So don't abuse it by going into the confession to reveal something, the confessional to reveal something confidential, but not using it for the purpose of receiving absolution. That puts the priest in a horrible position, and it's not something you should do. Deacon, thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule. I hope we can do this again very soon.
Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure. You're always welcome. And I look forward to future shows. And to all of you, thank you so much for being part of the show today. Both segments. I hope you listen to them. Take care, everyone, and God bless. Until next time. This is Bishop Bryan Ouellette for Vestiges of Christianity.